Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. This whole mess started back in 2018 when I joined Apex Solutions, a software startup. We negotiated a salary and agreed that there'd be no paid overtime with performance reviews after 3 months and then annually. Standard deal. The pay was decent, but not amazing for the workload, yet I really enjoyed the coding challenges, so I figured I'd gain valuable skills to leverage down the road. After 3 years, we had around 10 steady clients with more in the pipeline, and cash was flowing in steadily. That's when discussions about back pay and compensating for past overtime hours began. According to my estimates, I had racked up close to $6,000 in unpaid overtime by then, not pocket change. Although it couldn't technically be classified as back pay, the talk centered around a discretionary bonus to cover those extra hours. At that stage, everyone, myself included, seemed on board with that idea, especially since it had been discussed over company emails, so I felt it was all above board. I even suggested taking equity at a discount if there were cash flow issues, but those back pay talks just dragged on endlessly, irritating me. Finally, Vance, the CEO, offered me equity, but the company's valuation was inflated to ludicrous levels. Hundreds of millions for a 9-person outfit with around $2 million in projected annual revenue. My share? A minuscule 0.01% or less. It was clearly a slap in the face. A screw you for pursuing the overtime pay. I was absolutely livid. The very day Vance made that insulting offer, I handed in my resignation, effective immediately with my unused paid leave. This sent Calvin, the CTO, into a tailspin since my contract had no provisions for immediate departure. So there I went, walking out that same day to everyone's shock. The next morning, I sent Vance an official letter via registered mail, demanding my overtime compensation. When that was rejected with claims that any bonus was discretionary, I followed up with a more detailed demand letter that was also denied. However, I'd already consulted a lawyer who confirmed the company had no legal legs to stand on if I took them to court. Now, suing companies was still quite rare back then, so employers didn't expect that reaction. Times have changed since. After reviewing the applicable laws, my attorney pointed out a statute of limitations. I could wait almost 7 years, then file the lawsuit and demand interest. The law stated overdue payments accrued 9% interest on top of the prime rate, then 3.25%, compounded daily until paid. We're talking around 12-13% daily interest. The risk was the company going under before I could collect, but I decided it was worth a shot. I fired off one last letter stating I expected all owed amounts paid immediately, including interest. Naturally, they ignored it. Life went on for the next few years as Apex grew into a major local player. Once the statute clock ran down, I found a new lawyer and filed suit. With copies of all communication, demand letters, and their dismissive responses in hand, we sought $112,000 in unpaid overtime plus interest. What I hadn't anticipated were additional fixed penalties for each instruction to work uncompensated overtime, bringing the total demand to around $135,000. Vance absolutely lost it when he got served. I received a raging voicemail from him, which I promptly recorded and submitted to the court records. When the judge heard that rant along with the overwhelming paper trail against Apex, he immediately ruled in my favor and ordered the company to pay the full amount plus my legal fees, no delays. The Department of Labor also hit them with a full audit. 1 week later, Apex coughed up the $135,000 judgment. To twist the knife further, I heard that on the night of the ruling, Vance got plastered and drunkenly crashed his brand new Mercedes into another car, earning himself a DUI and suspended license. Since he was impaired, his insurer refused to cover the Mercedes damages. All in all, an absolutely glorious outcome for the ages. The next one is an entitled people story. I've lived in my house for over 15 years and never had any issues with the neighbors that came and went. That all changed when the house next door sold and the new owner moved in. From day one, he gave me bad vibes, just an angry-looking middle-aged guy who never smiled or waved. I didn't think much of it at first. Some people just aren't that friendly. The problem started about 2 months after he moved in. I was doing some gardening one weekend when I noticed the neighbor starting to build a fence between our properties. I didn't think too much of it at first, figured he just wanted some privacy. But as the day went on, I realized the fence was going closer and closer to my house and was starting to cut right through my garden. I went over and tried talking to him nicely, figuring it was just an honest mistake. "Excuse me, I think your fence is going into my garden and yard a bit. The property line is that row of bushes. Your fence shouldn't be on my side." He glared back at me, not stopping his construction. "Don't tell me where I can and can't build. This is my land, and I'll put a fence wherever I want. Mind your own business." I was shocked at his aggressive response. I really don't want to argue, but you're building on my property. I just want to resolve this peacefully. There's nothing to resolve. Now get lost before I make you leave, he shouted. I could tell this wasn't going anywhere, so I just wrote down his address and went back inside to figure out my options. The next day, I looked up the county records of our property lines, and sure enough, his fence was encroaching almost 15 feet into my yard. I printed this out and brought it over to him, again trying to be reasonable. Look, I checked the official records. Your fence is going well into my property according to the county. Can you please move it back to the correct line? He crumpled up my document and threw it on the ground. You must have photoshopped that. You're just trying to steal my land. I'm not moving anything. He then proceeded to keep building the fence further into my yard. At this point, I'd had enough. I called the county department that deals with property disputes, and they said they'd send someone out to inspect in a few days. In the meantime, this guy was rapidly constructing his fence to cut off more of my garden. The county inspector finally came, and I showed him the records I had found. He then did his own survey of the land while I watched nervously with my unpleasant neighbor glaring at us the whole time. After an hour of measuring, the inspector told me I was 100% correct. The fence was well beyond the neighbor's property. He then wrote up an official notice and handed it to the angry neighbor, telling him he had to tear down the fence and move it back to the correct property line. The neighbor turned beet red, crumpling up the notice and threw it back in the inspector's face. "I'm not moving anything. Get off my land." The inspector calmly replied, "Sir, if that fence isn't moved in the next week, we will have to take legal action and force its removal. I suggest you comply." With that, he tipped his hat and left. Over the next few days, I kept watching and hoping the awful fence would come down, but my neighbor kept adding to it instead, working on it every day to make it even bigger. I finally called the county back and told them he was ignoring the notice. They said the next step was to take him to court over the issue. So a few weeks later, we had a hearing where the county inspector presented his survey evidence again. The judge looked everything over and was ready to rule when suddenly my neighbor pulled out some documents of his own. Apparently, he had some acquaintance draw up fake survey papers that tried to claim an extra 20 feet of my property was actually his. The judge scrutinized these amateurish fake surveys and immediately threw them out as nonsense. He then ruled fully in my favor, saying the fence had to be torn down and moved back to the original property lines within 2 weeks, or my neighbor would face fines and possible jail time. This finally seemed to get through his thick skull. Over the next few days, he begrudgingly took down the monstrosity he had built and moved the remains back to his own land where they belonged. I was so relieved to have my garden and yard back, no more fence cluttering up the place. The county even sent an official surveyor back out to pound in new marker stakes along the property line so something like this wouldn't happen again. My neighbor won't make eye contact anymore when I'm out gardening, but that's fine by me. The court ruling and surveying process cost him thousands in fees, which he brought on himself with his stubbornness. Hopefully this taught him not to illegally try and seize other people's land. All I had to do was stay calm, research the facts, and let the system handle it properly. In the end, the truth prevailed, and the garden I love so much is back to being my own private sanctuary. The next one is a petty revenge story. A few years ago, we purchased very basic Android tablets from Amazon for our preteen boys. These were not name brand devices and were being turned over to 2 active young guys. We figured damage was very likely and purchased the Amazon protection plan for about $20 a device. These tablets were only about $95 each. According to Amazon and the underwriter, the policies covered everything except loss, drops, water damage, broken screens, whatever. Anyway, the boys had the devices for about 6 months when both of their batteries started to fail. We would charge them up, but it was clear they weren't holding a charge and were becoming unusable. We reached out to the phone number from Amazon and reported the devices weren't working. They did some over-the-phone troubleshooting as we explained the battery issue. They then told us that it was still under factory warranty and we needed to communicate with the manufacturer for repair. As I mentioned, these were basically pieces of crap from a no-name company. We reached out to them and they wanted us to pay for shipping and a $49.95 diagnostic fee per device. This caused me to read the policy more carefully and understand exactly what was covered. At that point, I came up with a plan. The family was heading out for dinner and I loaded the devices into a backpack. Then I accidentally placed the bag directly behind my wife's rear tire and she mistakenly backed over it as we were pulling out. I got out of the car to see what the crunching sound was and suggested she pull forward again so I could check. At that point, the tablets were essentially shards of glass and broken plastic. I resubmitted the claim and poured the various remnants of the devices into a box. A few weeks later, we had Amazon credit for 2 new tablets. Our boys still laugh hysterically over this, and my wife is still a little mortified that I would do it. The next one is a malicious compliance story. The context: I have an aunt, I'll call her Susan for the sake of this post, and she has a son who I'll call John. John is a very similar age to me, so I would spend a lot of time with John when I was little, and he would spend a lot of time at my parents' house. Susan wasn't married to John's father, let's call him Harry, but they were in a relationship at the time. It wasn't a great relationship, though. All of that is relevant, I think, so with that sorted, let's move on to the story. This story takes place on a day that Susan had been arguing with Harry. They lived together at the time, and she'd left the house to get away from him. She decided to come round to visit my mom to vent, and I was home as well. While Susan and my mom were talking, the doorbell went. Harry had turned up with John, and they were both outside. Susan quickly ran upstairs to avoid seeing him, and I was told not to let Harry know she was there. I'm guessing Harry was over because he wanted to know if my mom had heard from Susan or wanted to drop John off so he could go look for her. I don't really know. I was pretty young at the time, and that wasn't what I was thinking about. What I was thinking was that I needed clarification on the rule that I'd just been given. You can probably see where this is going. My mom answered the door and started to speak to Harry. Meanwhile, I started tugging at her, trying to get my mom's attention to be able to ask her a question in private. After a little while, with me trying to find a way of whispering to my mom, she eventually says in frustration, "Mooch, it's rude to whisper. Anything you want to say, you can say out loud." At this point, there's nothing I can do, except ask in the raised voice of a child who has been told to speak up. I know I'm not allowed to tell Harry, but can I tell John his mom's upstairs? Cue a stunned silence, in which my mortified mother mentally processes what just happened, and comes to terms with the fact she couldn't even tell me off for doing exactly what she said. Harry, bless him, tried to pretend he hadn't heard anything, even if it was painfully obvious that he must have heard, and left shortly after. John stayed and saw Susan. Susan later went back home, and I'm guessing she argued with Harry some more. They really weren't great for each other. And as for my mom, I don't think she ever really lived it down. I think she still catches her breath when she remembers how awkward that moment was, and she never told me not to whisper again. The next one is an entitled people story. Believe me or not that this happened to me in one day. I-30 female work customer service, hair store if anyone cares, and I love my job despite the crazy and rude customers I may get once or twice a week. From putting money on the counter to paid but wants their change handed back to wanting the most expensive thing in the store only to complain about the price of it. I thought I've dealt with it all, but his was baffling to me and takes the cake. We just opened, and we only got a few customers come in. 3 people exactly. A woman brought 4 bags of braiding hair to me at the counter. I smiled and was about to speak and ring her up, but she cuts me off and says she's not ready yet and goes down another aisle. She brings back more stuff and continues to tell me each time she's not done yet or she's still looking. I offer her a basket to carry her items, but she said no and leaves again. She makes about 4 trips back to the counter at this point, and I decided since she didn't want a basket, I moved her items behind the counter with me to be out the way. When I do this, another customer is actually ready to check out. I happily start ringing up the items, but then guess who walks back up? She immediately asked where her things were. I told her I moved them to the side so that they wouldn't be in the way of other customers, and I didn't want to accidentally ring her stuff with someone else. Well, she wasn't happy to hear this. She said she was almost done and shouldn't have checked out anyone before her. That was apparently the point of her leaving all her items on the counter. I reminded her she told me multiple times she wasn't ready, and I offered her a basket so she could shop freely, but she snapped at me saying she didn't want the basket, and I shouldn't have checked anyone out when she was there first. I sighed deeply because it was 9:30-ish in the morning now, and I really didn't want to deal with this so early. We literally just opened. I told the woman just because she sat something up here doesn't make it a save my spot in line pass. If you say you're not ready and someone is done shopping, I will get the next person in line. I asked her if she was ready now, holding up my scanner. She said yes, but wanted my manager, store owner, to do it. I said he out back doing inventory and I couldn't leave the counter. She was pissed and claimed she was in a hurry to get to work. I ranged up her stuff mid-slow, which pissed her off more IDC. After I gave her the bags, she said she's going to talk to my manager later. I smiled and said okay. I told him about it and he rolled his eyes and told me not to worry about it. I wasn't, but I laughed. Fast forward to noon, I went on my lunch break, picked up my order, returned to the parking lot of my job, and sat in my car eating while watching videos on my phone. The next thing I hear is a knock on my window. There is a woman, different woman, standing at my door. I rolled my window slightly and asked, "Yeah, can I help you?" She says she needs help. I'm thinking like she lost something or her car won't start and need a jump. I say, "Sure, ma'am, what's wrong?" She says I need your help in the store. Immediately, I shook my head and said, "Nah, I told the girl I was on my lunch break, but my manager was in the store to help her with anything she needed." She then says, "But I want your help, so come help me, please." I tell her no, but I'll be back after my break. She looks so offended, I guess, and says while folding her arms, "Are you really not gonna come help me?" I looked at my phone, then back at her and say, "Ma'am, I have 20 more minutes left on my break. When I get back, I'll help you if you just only want my help, but I'm not leaving my car." She stomps into the store, and I went back to my videos. Not long after, I see the girl standing outside with my manager pointing at me. According to him, she was trying to get him to make me come in to help her with whatever she needed. He told her I would be back in later, but he would help her. She refused his help and left the store. I swear I got a headache from all this. I told my husband about the day I had, and he said maybe the second girl liked me, and that's why she only wanted my help. I told him even if that was true, she still would have to wait till my break was over. We laughed about it, but it really was the craziest encounter with entitled people in one day for me. The next one is an entitled parent story. I have had people state that I only do mad mommy stories about parents that don't allow their kids to get Pokemon, Magic the Gathering, or comics. I usually don't do the fathers because the incidents aren't really that interesting. It's usually just no, and they walk away. I had this incident about a year ago, and while there was no insanity, it was interesting. Today's story begins with a typical family. Mother, father, and 3 kids. 2 boys, 1 girl. The boys were getting some packs, choosing what they wanted, and were making stacks. Whenever the girl picked one up, the father took it from her and put it back. I looked at the mother and she was getting pissed. Yes, I know that from previous postings it seems that every woman that comes into my booth is spitting up venom and is taking a flamethrower to my booth, but that actually is rare. Flamethrowers are heavy. The boy's father paid for the cards and the 3 of them left. Mother and daughter were still in my booth, and the girl was upset. I walked over to her and handed her a couple of packs. The mother thanked me, and they left. A few minutes later, the father came back with the girl and told her to put the cards back because she couldn't just take them. I then told the father that I gave them to her. The mother, now very pissed, told the father, "I told you he gave them to her." He looked annoyed and said that they weren't for girls. Yada yada yada. Now mother is beyond pissed. She tells the boys to give her the bags with the cards in them and hands them to me. She tells me to keep the money, but the boys weren't allowed to have them. Father states that he bought them and they were the kids. She stated that they were given to her and they were the girls. So here's your choice. She gets the cards or no one does. She then went on about a baseball game the father and boys were going to was canceled unless the daughter went, if she wanted to go. It seems that this was an ongoing theme. He was bonding with the boys and left the girl out because he just assumed that she would not be interested. Of course he never asked. Father responded with a meek, "I didn't think she'd be interested." I don't know what happened afterwards as the left. I hope the father realized what a moron he was. The next one is an entitled parent's story. Just for a bit of background, I work at a fairly popular restaurant in my city. It's one where we cook food on a flat-top grill at the bar, and I'm pretty damn good at it. Part of what we do is if a child wants to order an adult meal but isn't sure if they can finish it, we offer a sample size of that meal for free. Sometimes parents let their kids try something from the adult menu, and it's perfectly fine. Then came Monday this week when I had just walked in. There was a mother, the entitled one, her daughter, and her husband. It's only 11:30, so I think, okay, early lunch, they're probably not that hungry. And the mother and father both ask for something simple, but the daughter wants a steak. The mother says, "No, sweetie, you won't finish it, and I know you'll throw it away." That's when the father points out the sample serving, and I say, "Yeah, that's something easy I can make, plus it's free." The mother gets this really sour look on her face and says, "I don't care how low the price is, I just know she'll end up throwing it away." I pause for a moment, and decide that I could maybe nudge her to getting it for her daughter since both the kid and husband were so adamant about getting it. The rest of the conversation goes as follows. EM. Why can't you just accept the fact that I said no? F. Hun, it's free, and if she doesn't like it, there's no harm in not finishing it. EM. I don't care. I said no. You should understand that as your wife. If I say jump, you ask how high. Me. Ma'am, there is no need to get this upset over a free 5 ounces steak that you aren't even ordering. EM, as loud as possible. Shut the duck up. I will not tolerate some brat lecturing me on what to do. At this point, we've been arguing about the damn free steak for almost 30 minutes. That's when I put my foot down and said, "If you don't stop, my manager will have to get involved." To which I was hit with a big fat "shut the duck up" as she grabbed her daughter's hand and ran out of the restaurant. The dad paid me $50, keep in mind they only ordered drinks, which totaled to around $10, and chased after his wife. I didn't see them the rest of the day. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.